Question number 5, Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Social Housing. Does she agree with Monte Cecilia Housing Trust Chief Executive Bernie Smith that the government lacks a cohesive emergency housing plan, and Salvation Army Social Policy Director Ian Hutson, who says permanent accommodation is still lacking?
Well, Mr Speaker,
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, no. And because actually I think $300 million more going into emergency housing is a comprehensive and cohesive emergency housing plan. Also, Mr Speaker, my cup's half full. And the reason, and I see the quotes from Bernie Smith that says, quote, I think it's amazing, $300 million over the next 4.5 years for emergency housing. I hear the words of Ian Hutson from Salvation Army, quote, $300 million to support people in severe housing need is very welcome.
Order.
Supplementary, sir.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Why did she reject the invitation to join a cross-party round table to consider the recommendations of the homelessness inquiry, given that her policy will provide only 2,200 emergency housing places at any one time, when there are 41,000 Kiwis homeless and in severe housing deprivation, according to Otago University?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, I probably didn't join because I was busy actually doing something about the problem and not just yet again reassessing it. Mr Speaker, I think it's really important to the House that it's cleared up that those 41,000 people that Otago University are actually bringing are not homeless. So many of them actually do have a roof over their head and do not require emergency housing. They may be requiring more permanent housing, of course, which the pipeline we've got coming through, but it's not actually the emergency housing that they're needing.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
How can she say that she is delivering already on the recommendations of the cross-party inquiry when she's only delivering half the emergency housing that's needed? She has reduced the number of state houses. There is no systemic fix to the housing crisis, no commitment to a national strategy to end homelessness, and she doesn't even accept the government's own definition of homelessness.
Well, Mr Speaker.
Honourable Paula Bennett.
Well, Mr Speaker, if that was the case, then the member himself put out a policy in July that was actually for fewer beds than what the government announced on Monday. So in July, the member put out a policy saying that there would be 1,400 beds. National put out a policy on Monday, fully funded for 1,400 places, which is very different, more than what his whole policy is about.
True.
Order. Order.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Why are thousands of emergency housing beds needed when the Prime Minister says there aren't thousands of quote-unquote real homeless people and, as he said, that the homeless people don't want help?
Well, Mr Speaker,
The Honourable Paula
I think,
Bennett.
as I clearly stated, of that big number of the 41,000 that the member bandies around, those are people that may be living in some unsatisfactory conditions, but they're actually not truly homeless under the definition that most people would see it. Mr Speaker, this side of the House has a comprehensive housing plan, one that is actually fully funded, so $300 million for those 1,400 places, as opposed to the $15 million, which included no services, no tenancy management and no actually building of new supply, which that member tried to do.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Doesn't she think that it will be expensive and ultimately fruitless to just take a welfare approach through the provision of emergency housing to a market failure that has left 41,000 Kiwis homeless and in severe housing deprivation? And wouldn't it make more sense to also massively increase the supply of affordable and state housing, as Labor promises to do?
Well, Mr Speaker, another bit of good news
Bennett.
for the member himself, that as I've repeatedly said, the State House social housing is increasing by more than 3,000 new houses over the next few years alone. We've put another $120 million into supporting community housing providers to build their supply. We are now making sure that we have it in the emergency housing area as well. Mr Mr Speaker, no one, not even that member, can argue that we do not have a comprehensive social housing program all underway.
Left behind, Twyford.